Hi, welcome to the Mythic Observatory. What if the real reason your fantasy series feels flat isn't because you didn't put enough into book one? What if it's because you put too much in and it still never truly peaks? Now, I'm not talking about spectacle, that visual scale of the moment with bigger and louder and, bigger armies, bigger magic, bigger destruction. I mean, structurally. And to make things more clear, let's separate and define two things writers often confuse. One is book one bloat and book one peak. Okay, so what exactly are these two things? Well, book one peak is the moment in book one where the surface conflict is resolved, but also the core conflict of the entire series is exposed under maximum emotional pressure, or in other words, it's the structural pressure of the story's root imbalance. For example, in the Hunger Games, the surface conflict is simple. Katniss must survive the arena, but the root imbalance is not the games. It's a world where the capital maintains control by turning children into spectacle. So, what creates structural pressure on the imbalance? It's not more danger in the arena, and it's not stronger opponents, not even when the mutts show up. It's when Katniss refuses to play the role the system requires. It is the structural pressure that raises consequence. And to be clear, structural pressure is when the core conflict of the story forces the protagonist into a meaningful and irreversible choice. It means the story can no longer allow the protagonist to simply observe or avoid. They cannot delay anymore. They can't escape. They must act. And that action reveals who they are or who they're becoming. It is the moment when the visible antagonist is confronted, the surface problem appears resolved, and the protagonist believes they understand what the fight was really about. And we'll go more into that in just a moment. So, book one peak, yes, should feel like victory, but it should also reveal the edges of something larger. I mean, if your series first book ends cleanly and neatly with no loose ends, with no widening crack, well, your series has nowhere to deepen. And this is a problem sometimes when writers are writing that first book as a standalone. The problem that many writers fall when it comes to book one bloat is when you add more plot, more lore, more spectacle, more world building, more cool stuff without increasing the structural pressure. It's an accumulation, but without depth. And if you don't increase that structural pressure, it means book one never peaks, as I said. It never pressurizes the real fracture of the world. And the next book will have to compensate. And why is this bad? Why is this not the way? Well, when book one continues to circle around the central conflict rather than resolve it, the story never truly lands. Movement exists, but its trajectory lacks. And readers feel this instinctively. Even if your world is rich and the characters are engaging, a quiet uncertainty starts forming inside your readers. And they start to ask, what is this story actually about? I mean, without a defined turning point, the narrative withholds its own meaning. It presents motion without commitment. And you end up either with a series that just goes on and on without any real direction and seems like it lacks a point. Now, What else can cause book one bloat? Fear of ending the story too soon, mistaking delay for suspense, overbuilding the world before using it, no clear visible conflict, confusing mystery with structure, trying to introduce the entire series at once and avoiding consequence, to name a few. Now, this lack of resolution in book one does not stay contained. It echoes forward into the rest of your series because direction was never established. Later books have nothing firm to deepen. So instead of building downwards into systems, into causes, into the root and balance, the story is forced to extend outwards, extend sideways, searching for weight that it never anchored into. So what should have been a foundation becomes a drift. Okay, so this lack of resolution in book one does not stay contained. It echoes forward into the rest of your series because direction was never established. Later books have nothing firm to deepen. And so instead of building downwards into systems, into causes, into the root imbalance, the story is forced to expand outwards, sideways, searching for weight that it never anchored into. What should have been a foundation becomes adrift, and the series loses structural integrity that it needs to endure. Now, as I mentioned, part of why this happens with book bloat versus book peak is that many writers design book one as a standalone. So, what do? They kill the villain, they seal the threat, they restore order, and they close the wound. The ending indeed can be extremely satisfying. Everything is tied up very neatly in a tight little bow. But book two has a problem. See, if there's no fracture left to deepen, what does the writer do? They have to invent something bigger. So in book two, we have a new villain, maybe bigger army, darker magic, higher stakes. But we need that connective tissue. You do that, and then when you start working on your book two, you can start showing just how wide that root cause spreads throughout your world. You can see a pattern through a series. For example, you might have book one, reveal the fracture, book two, spread the fracture, book three is to converge on the fracture, and then with book four, you're healing or transforming that fracture. Okay, where I said we'd go into something more in a moment, I wanted to go into a deeper dive with the structural break in a good book one in a series. So every book one begins with a surface conflict. There's a tyrant, a magical threat, a rebellion, a survival scenario. It's what's happening on the surface. But please know that a true book one peak doesn't come from the surface conflict alone. It comes from pressurizing it. Now, we spoke on this a bit. It means stakes rise, options narrow, escape routes close. Now, you've heard me say that the protagonist cannot observe, cannot avoid anymore. They have to act. They are being forced into a defining choice. And we see who they are. This is not a tactical choice, though indeed there can be tactical choices, absolutely. But what's more important is that they're making an identity level choice. Think safety or sacrifice, control or trust, power or integrity. That choice is going to reveal something deeper. It's going to expose the root distortion beneath the visible plot. This is the moral fracture driving your entire series. So maybe the story isn't actually about defeating the tyrant. Maybe it's about whether power will corrupt the one who defeats the tyrant. Whatever your root distortion is, once it's revealed, It defines the rest of your series. Because after the root distortion is exposed, future books can deepen it. And this is not just running into escalation. And that's what the story, the ones that stay with us, are really about. Okay, so one level deeper. When it comes to your book one peak, it needs to reach the highest point of what book one is about. Please note you're not going to resolve your entire series. All right, you don't want to do that. But for book one, it should fully exhaust the surface conflict. If the premise is defeat the tyrant, then please defeat the tyrant. If it's about surviving the war, then push that war to its breaking point. Take your visible conflict as far as it can go, but do not resolve the deeper moral question underneath it. That is for later. Remember, book one is the visible layer of the iceberg. It's where the peak cracks the surface, and the rest of the series descends into that crack. And that's important because if book one tries to solve the root fracture of your world, then what's left for the rest of your series? All you can do after that is just inflate, make things bigger instead of deeper, scale, not consequence. And that problem is when stakes increase without deepening and the story starts to feel repetitive. The world may expand, but your meaning does not. Last bit. A strong book one peak feels satisfying, but it also feels like a door has been opened. So your readers close the book, wondering, I wonder what's next, because this feels like it's only the beginning. You have designed that moment intentionally, and your series will feel architectural, not episodic. Anyway, if you feel this was helpful, I dive deeper into this with a free companion essay on my Mythic Observatory Substack. Things that I explore with it are the 7 most common patterns for book one bloat, along with book one peak versus suspense. Because at first glance, they may appear to be opposite forces, but they actually reinforce each other really, really well. I also explore a bit with how story conflict operates in layers from the surface to the structural to the root. And you can read this by going to the links below. Until then, may your steel be tempered, your roots unbroken, and may your path rise to meet you.